Hi there, this is Atilla Yeşilada, dropping another video for Real Turkey channel. Today I'm going to talk about Turkish politics, in specific about our President Erdogan, who is in full panic mode. Why? Because his AK party is melting like a snowflake in August in opinion polls. First, I'm going to explain why AKP has been losing votes since the 31st of March local elections. Two, whether AKP's AK Party slide is reversible. Three, which is sort of like tangential but essential to understand the dynamics of Turkish politics, that Erdogan is actually lame duck. He is not allowed to run for presidency again, but there are ways to circumvent that constitutional rule. What he wants to do to stand for election once again, because authoritarians don't retire, they are retired. And four, what will be his potential actions to reverse the course of his AK party. And finally, and this is sort of like the great finale, how all of these is going to affect Turkey's austerity program, which I shall call economic stabilization program. But I would appreciate a favor from you. If you watch this video, you may wish to watch my previous video titled, "Is the World Hurling towards another financial crisis," which received almost no views because the title, I believe, should have been hurtling towards a financial crisis. I think it remains relevant. I am not an expert on emerging markets, but I've been doing it as part of my business for 35 years. And I think I have valuable insights about my conclusion that the kind of panic attacks we experienced in the markets 2 weeks ago are very likely to repeat, but they are not going to morph into a full-scale financial crisis, except with one caveat. If Trump is reelected, he could, yes, topple the world. He could hurl the world into another financial crisis. Let's get back to our topic. You will see two poll tables below. These are sort of like poll of polls tables that our staff at Istanbul Analytics has compiled. Both the raw data before undecideds are distributed pro rata to parties, and then the finished product. This table excludes two recent polls, one by Sonar, fairly accurate, impartial, and one by a new agency called DN, little track record. I believe it's left-leaning because the poll was commissioned by a left-wing TV station called Tele1. Both show CHP, the main opposition party, leading AKP by more than 5 percentage points, which is very significant. Why do I get this reflection, which really annoys me? Let's move this way, and it got worse. This is great. Why is AKP melting in the polls? The participants who answer secondary questions in these polls, as well as in polls specifically conducted to take the pulse of the nation, show that 60, sometimes up to 80% of them complain about poor economic conditions, inflation, unemployment, difficulty of finding jobs, low-income jobs, etc., etc. This indeed is the case because Turkey is in the middle of an economic stabilization program, which is an austerity or belt-tightening program, which a lot of dissident Turkish economists called standby light, making reference to IMF orchestrated standby packages. There are also other reasons, as far as I'm concerned. One of them is just the unbridled corruption of the entire AKP party. It's crony capitalism, it's nepotism. All of these things existed for at least 10 years, but they didn't really get noticed, or the general populace did not care, simply because Erdogan has been good to them. He has produced economic growth that's faster than the averages of previous episodes. He has successfully brought the economy out of the pandemic, and we're one of the few countries where output is higher than pre-pandemic peaks. He has been very generous towards those who received their incomes from the state, civil servants, as well as Turkey's 16 plus million retirees. And of course, the state also changes or upgrades the statutory minimum wage every year. And usually the statutory minimum wage hikes are faster than the inflation. Turkey somehow thinks it can engineer prosperity by legislating higher minimum wages, which is a very strange view. But hey, this is the topic of another video. So there are a whole sorts of reasons. And it is strange. I've been following polls since 2010. Before then, they weren't widely available. Now we have polls almost every week. And I've never seen such a consensus. I remember reading at least a dozen polls since 31st of March, the local election date, and all of them, without exception, show main opposition party leading AKP. That's very rare. Usually you get one or two polls which report results which are in opposition to the majority of the other opinion surveys. So there is just this broad spread dissatisfaction with Erdogan and his party. Regarding Erdogan, we also have, of course, likability or approval rating polls. There has been very few new ones recently, but one of the co-founders of one of the very reliable, impartial agencies in Turkey, Istanbul Economic Research, Mr. Can Selçuklu, has granted an interview to independent news site Diken, meaning thorn, where he said that now CHP's two mayors, Ekrem İmamoğlu in Istanbul and Mr. Mansur Yavaş in Ankara, are leading Erdogan approval ratings. And this is not because Erdogan is doing worse than usual, but because these two mayors are doing a splendid job in terms of governing their cities and rising in the opinion of the general public. So it's not only his party, but Erdogan is also in trouble. Now, this is very important for the reason that according to the constitution, Erdogan cannot run again. He will have exhausted his term limits by the time of next elections, next regularly scheduled elections in 2028. And he doesn't want to retire. He can't retire. Look, I mean, he is doomed to become the president of Turkey for the rest of his life because he's accused of incredible corruption and self-enrichment. Remember, these are accusations. I'm not vouching for their truthfulness, but that's the perception. In a country like Turkey, it doesn't matter whether you are really corrupt or not. If you lose power, you get prosecuted and you spend the rest of your life in the courtroom or in prison or persecuted. It depends on your political leaning. Really, if you are pro-Erdogan, he will be persecuted. But the fact is, he will have no peaceful retirement. He can, if he can, appoint his successor and that person wins the elections. But so far, there are really no candidates. Mr. Erdogan has thoroughly purged his party of any young talent, of any charismatic persona, so that those who remain in the party are rent seekers, profit seekers, who have zero charisma. They're zombies. There are two ways Mr. Erdogan can bypass this term limit. One, the Grand Assembly legislating a new constitution. Two, the Grand Assembly, Turkey's parliament, calling early elections. Erdogan can dissolve the parliament and go to elections, but that doesn't grant him an additional term. It must be the Grand Assembly voting for early elections that will grant him a third term. Now, his problem is his party and his ally MHP don't have the votes. In total, I think they have 316 votes, and it takes at least 360 votes for early elections or for a constitutional amendment to be presented to a national referendum. Now, even if he finds 360 votes, he will lose a national referendum because people in these referenda, people don't vote for the topic on the ballot question, but on their personal view of Mr. Erdogan, which, as I've said, is extremely poor. So his only chance is early elections. He is currently in the process of recruiting or transferring Congress people called deputies in Turkey, members of the parliament from opposition parties. I'm sure these people have had a change of heart and now they realize AK Party is the future of Turkey. This is why they're switching to AK Party. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Monetary bribes or promises of favors, such as, being nominated for the Turkish parliament in the next election in a safe AKP seat. As I shoot this video, the AKP spokesperson, Mr. Hamza Dag, officially announced that at least 3 deputies from opposition, as well as 15 mayors, will officially join AKP. So 3 doesn't cut the mustard. He needs to find 38 more. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. It has never happened in Turkish history. So, constitutional amendment is out of question. The people will not ratify it, judging by the current state of the polls. Early election, he needs the cooperation of main opposition party. AKP plus main opposition party, CHP, do have more than 360 votes. And the chairman of the main opposition party, Mr. Özel, has made an offer to Erdogan. He said, early elections, which grant you another term, fine, but no later than end of 2025. This is very smart because by end of 2025, there is no way the current economic stabilization program will have disinflated the economy permanently and to grant Erdogan enough time for pork barreling. Because, as you know, disinflation engineered by monetary and fiscal policy is always a very painful process. More often than not, it causes recession. Currently, the debate for the world economy and the American economy is whether Fed or conditions can engineer a soft landing, which is disinflation without a recession, but some economic slowdown. I don't believe in it. It has never happened in the past. And if it happens, it's not because the cleverness of monetary or fiscal authority or the government at large, but because of luck. And current conditions simply don't warrant it. Turkey's in not a different position. If you want low and stable inflation, you got to face recession. And recessions are highly unpopular with the public opinion. Now, polls which show AKP sliding further down from top rank are only the tip of the iceberg. I witnessed the business community, which is usually very docile, objecting loudly to the economic stabilization program because of high interest rates, difficulty of accessing new loans, as well as the strong Turkish lira policy, which of course reduces the competitiveness of low value-added Turkish exports, in particular textiles, but other like, agricultural industry, iron and steel, etc., are suffering seriously, simply because Bangladesh, Pakistan, China have now much cheaper costs than Turkey. They are much more competitive. So they are against the economic stabilization program too. Also, large segments of society. I mean, this summer or the last 3 weeks, I'm sorry, after 11 years, in local TV stations and 6 years in my YouTube career, I've developed serious problems with my throat. So I have to, use the spray. We're seeing farmers staging massive protests because farm prices are extremely low. They are spilling produce on the highways and blocking them, which is somewhat familiar from France, but in my experience, it's the first time in Turkey. Retirees are up in arms, teachers, simply because their pay is low. I mean, labor unions, which with the exception of one, DISC, are pro-AKP, are also rebelling against the economic stabilization program. Essentially, from the perspective of Mr. Erdogan, he has two options regarding his political career and the fortunes of AK Party. A, double down on the economic stabilization program, that is, to allow its chief engineer and administrator, economy czar, Mehmet Şimşek, take even more measures, which are going to be extremely painful, but they will deliver results. How do I know? Because they've delivered results everywhere in the world. Economic theory is largely BS. It changes every year, but the practice of economics has been fairly constant. There are exceptions where austerity programs have not resulted in the achieved goals, but usually external conditions have been effective in those cases. In general, if you stick to austerity program, tight monetary policy, tight fiscal policy, low pay hikes, and some structural reforms like tax reform, labor reform, education reform, usually it delivers results. So one option for Erdogan is double down and give Mehmet Şimşek the authority to do whatever it takes to deliver low inflation. That's going to take at least a year. And then he needs another year to reinflate the economy. That is, to have enough money in the budget to spend on the election campaign. The second option is to ditch the economic stabilization program and go back to the bad old days, heterodox economic policies, which means complete nonsense, making theory as one goes along, essentially being opportunistic, giving people what they want. So retirees, do they want pay hikes? Sure, yeah, raise the pensions. Minimum wage, double it. Civil servants' salaries, give them what they want. They want double their salaries and wages? Sure, fine, yeah. And cover that by either state borrowing or money printing, which means lower interest rates. The problem with that is that it leads to inflation immediately because Turkey's inflation expectations are completely unhinged. The true inflation expectations are running in 3 digits. And you can check one of my videos below. These are not private surveys. These figures are from official surveys conducted by the Central Bank of Turkey called Household and Private Sector Monthly Inflation Surveys. What will Erdogan do? Now, that's the gist, it's sort of like the great reveal or the grand finale of the video. Strangely enough, he has great trust and faith in Mehmet Şimşek, which happens if he likes someone, he is very loyal to him, and he will take advice from him. Even if he doesn't think it's the right advice, he will give him a chance. That's one option. But before he drops Mehmet Şimşek, he is going to go back to his old methods, which is diversion, to detract the attention of the people from economic conditions to find something that would help them gather under the banner of Erdogan and AKP. One is to promote the idea, as Trump does, that the third world war is very close and we need strong and experienced leadership. Two, of course, anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is made very easy by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Three, Turkey's, scapegoats, LGBTQ plus community. As you know, gayness is an infectious disease. If you hang around with gays for a long time, you become gay. Jesus Christ. But this theory is widely adhered to in Turkey, and not only among the conservatives and Islamists, but across the society. We are a fairly homophobic society. He also has another option. He can sideline his opponents. Already, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu has been convicted of a frivolous offense. The offense is insulting the High Election Board, which is punishable by 5 years in prison, as well as a ban from holding political or public office for 5 years. He is also fired automatically or sacked from his position as mayor of Istanbul. See how convenient it is? He has been convicted. He is appealing his sentence, which goes through the High Court of Appeals, then the Constitutional Court. The High Court of Appeals will ratify his conviction, I'm 100% sure. The Constitutional Court will strike it down because it's somehow a more honest court. But then again, neither Mr. Erdogan nor his sidekick, Mr. Bahçeli, abide by the orders of the Constitutional Court. Yes, this is Turkey for you. I'm not making this up. Both think Constitutional Court is completely useless. In fact, if they managed to change the Constitution, they would completely sideline the Constitutional Court of Turkey. And finally, of course, he's going to go out and spend a lot to buy more deputies. I don't think any of this is going to work. I would be extremely, extremely surprised if he can find at least 40 deputies, Congress people, who would, for rewards or for genuine reasons, migrate to AKP, which is a party that's collapsing. I mean, it is okay for politicians to migrate to winners. We all do that to a certain extent. But joining AKP, a party that's dropping like a lead balloon in the polls, that's sort of like career suicide. So what's Erdogan going to do? At the end, he's going to sit down with CHP chairman, Mr. Özel, to bargain about the date of the elections. As I've said, end of 2025 is extremely early. There is no way Mr. Erdogan can make some progress on inflation and find the money to bankroll his next election campaign. Can Özel change his mind? Can Özel agree or concede to a date later than 2025, say 2026? Yes, but he has conditions. And these conditions are, well, more welfare spending, raising the salaries, raising the pensions of retirees, raising the minimum wage, taxing the rich. If Erdogan does that, Turkey's economic stabilization program will be dead. Now, wait a second. Taxing the rich is not a bad idea. Taxing people who have multiple homes and rent the rest is a good idea. It's a fair idea, which is practiced in many developed countries. Why can't he do that? Simply because Turkey's rich are now members of AKP. 10 years ago, most of the rich came from the opposition ranks. Secularists, people who vote for CHP, or if there's a center-right party, who vote for a center-right party. But that's not AKP. But over the last 10, 15 years, Mr. Erdogan has successfully created his own class of wealthy people who sometimes with their own efforts, but mostly because of AKP favoritism, have amassed great amount of wealth. They invested this into real estate or into new businesses, and they're very loyal to AKP. Now, if you raise taxes, a more progressive income tax that's enforced strictly so that tax cheats go to prison, you're hurting your own constituency. Higher corporate taxes is also a bad idea from Mr. Erdogan's perspective, simply because the companies that pay very little taxes are his cronies. They also get the plum state tenders. And in return, they bankroll Mr. Erdogan's campaigns. So they provide campaign financing. Media barons. All Turkish newspapers are making losses, or televisions, mainstream televisions, mostly controlled by AKP, pro-AKP business people are making losses, but that doesn't make a difference because they get free advertising from state agencies, as well as cash infusions from other AKP business people. So, allowing the current tight monetary policy to be coupled with tight fiscal policy, either by raising new taxes or cutting spending, essentially stabbing Erdogan's crony system in the heart. And if he loses these people, A, the media will turn his back to him, which means opposition views will be more prominently displayed, and people will learn the truth about how corrupt this regime is and how he's screwing up economic management as well as diplomacy. Two, big business will turn against him, and he will have to conduct his election campaign with the official funds granted to parties by the treasury, which is very little. I mean, Erdogan spends at least 10 times than the annual transfers from treasury to all the major parties. When will he make that to choice? Well, in September, Turkey's long-term economic policy document called Medium-Term Economic Program is up for revision. And the revision will tell us whether there will be new taxes, whether the turn of the year pay and salary hikes, as well as the minimum wage hike, is in line with forward-looking inflation. That is central bank's target. Central bank's target for end 2025 CPI is 14%. Currently, inflation is running at 62%. And the consensus for year-end inflation is about 45%. When inflation is at 45%, and you only grant people, say, a 14% pay hike, say even 20%, they're not going to vote for you. I assure you that. But hey, I haven't given up hope on Erdogan. He has proven pragmatic in many ways, for instance, by appointing Mehmet Şimşek, by cutting down the cursing and the blame mongering to EU and the United States. So he's not anti-Western anymore. He has made up with Arab nations, which he alienated with his strange policies and being more Arab than Arabs themselves. So he could stick with Mehmet Şimşek. I haven't really given up hope on that, but I need to see proof, and that's going to be available at the end of September. More likely than not, and here I go by the consensus, he's going to tell Mehmet Şimşek, just make sure we don't have a major currency devaluation while I negotiate with main opposition leader Özel about the date of the early elections. Can that be done? Yeah, central bank has enough reserves. It can always borrow more from Turkish banks through swap operations or open market operations. So at the very least, Mehmet Şimşek can allow central bank to cut rates, the treasury to borrow more and spend lavishly on key constituencies while keeping currency stability. Of course, that doesn't mean dollar TL will be fixed at a given rate, but it will appreciate much lower than the going rate of inflation. So people will still have a reason to stay in Turkish lira deposits. Yes, this has been another broadcast of Real Turkey channel by Atilla Yeşilada. The summary is Erdogan is panicking. His party is losing ground against CHP in the polls. The problem is largely economic misery. He doesn't really have any means of turning the situation around. So first, he's going to resort to diversion and superficial agenda. That's going to fail. He's going to try to buy Congress people to find the votes to call elections at a time he desires. That's going to fail too. So what he's going to, more likely than not, he's going to abandon Turkey's economic austerity program and then within a year call early elections after a massive round of pork barreling. Hey, I have given you the future of Turkey for the next 18 months. By the way, I've been frequently criticized for not calling Turkey Turkiye. which is the official name. Look, only dictatorships change the name of their country. I am 65 years old. I was born in Turkey, raised in Turkey. I have lived in Turkey until 2 years ago, and damn me if I'm going to change the way I call my country just because Mr. Erdogan wanted it. He has stolen my wealth. He has stolen my freedom. He has stolen my right to free expression. He's not going to steal the name of my country. So, keep trolling me. I couldn't care less. As far as I'm concerned, it's Turkey. Thank you for your viewership. If you like it, subscribe. But more importantly, share it with people who are interested in Turkey. I'm more interested in traffic than likes and subscriptions. And no matter what, keep a cool head, because if you live in the United States, it's going to be a hell of an election campaign. Bye-bye now.